You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Paige, your host. I'm so glad you're joining me for another episode of Nutrition Matters podcast. Hey, I am so glad to connect with you. And it's actually a little bit of an unexpected podcast episode I'm recording right now because I was kind of ready to just record an episode that was entitled Goodbye for Now. Now, that's not to be negative. That's not to be try to make you feel bad for me. I've been in a place with the podcast where I just feel a little less energized with it, a little bit more nervous about putting stuff out there just because I get people who find my email address on the internet and then, take the time to send me really negative, hateful messages. And sometimes I just wonder, how much is this really worth it to me? There's so much good that comes from it. And I recognize that there's more good than negative. And I also am really trying to be fiercely sort of careful with my own energy levels so that I am able to do my job really well. So this podcast, I really put it out there as an attempt to put something out into the world for free that is hopefully quality educational materials and conversations where people can really get some good information to work through some of their issues or struggles for free. And the reason I put this podcast out there is actually I personally have benefited from podcasting immensely in my own personal life. And I actually started the podcast in an attempt to sort of pay it forward. And so I'm always really careful with kind of staying true to that intention because it's really easy to get wrapped up in, oh no, I'm getting negative emails. Oh no, my downloads aren't as good as someone else's or, whatever. It can get kind of easy to get wrapped up in some of that. And I think that's part of what sort of drains my energy levels. So all of this is just to say I'm sort of I'm trying to be really comfortable with the impermanence of a project like this. I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around some identity issues I have around what does it mean if I'm not podcasting? Who am I professionally? Am I still relevant? Am I still doing good things in the world? The answer is yes to all of that. It's just sometimes it's really tricky to navigate. So anyway, just kind of giving you some insight into my own brain and how things have been going for me lately. But I'm really glad to be here. I've sort of feel like I've turned a corner through all of that sort of struggle and thinking things through. I have kind of come out on the other side, just kind of being reinvested in my intentions and in my purpose with the podcast. And also just really wanting to be transparent in sort of what goes on behind the scenes and why, podcasting is so fun and so positive in so many ways, but also comes with some struggle, especially for me. I'm not someone who really wants to be the center of attention. If it weren't my professional work in my practice, I probably wouldn't even be on social media at all. I've just kind of lived my little quiet life. But it is something that I feel called to do. I feel grateful that I have the means and the platform to do it. And I just want to always continually be assessing, am I doing this in a responsible and helpful way while also maintaining my own energy levels for my family and my clients and my friends and my community. So anyway, that's what's been going on with me. Thanks for listening. So I wanted to record a podcast episode sort of in the spirit of talking about what does it look like when things are going well. So when we're talking about health and nutrition or mental health or things along those lines, it's really easy to get caught up in mental illness or like nutritional illness or eating disorders or ways that we can struggle when it comes to body image, food, nutrition, all of those topics. So while I think it's very important to discuss what that looks like, what the signs and symptoms are, how to work through it, what highlighting recovery narratives, I think all of that is so positive and so wonderful. And at the same time, I think it's really cool to look at what does it look like when things go well? What does it look like when someone is really pursuing wellness and a healthy relationship with food? What are some aspects of that we can sort of assess our own lives, our own nutrition, our own self-care, so that we can start to kind of build the tools and the skills to be able to recognize our momentum, recognize the wonderful things that are happening, even when it's sort of intermixed with some struggles. I know that when I work one-on-one with my clients in my practice, I often take some time during a session to sort of say, hey, let's zoom out. Yeah, you're struggling with this, and yeah, you had a really hard day 2 days ago, but let's look at where were you 6 months ago, and where are you now, and what steps have you taken forward? And let's kind of give yourself some credit for the things that are going well. So my intention with this podcast episode is sort of along the lines of I've been really inspired in the past when I've heard news stations say, hey, we're going to disrupt our typical programming of what is going wrong in the world, and we're going to actually report on people, places, communities, organizations that are doing really incredible things in the world. And we're going to talk about, what's going right. I'm so inspired by those stories. And yes, I do believe it's important to stay informed about all of the other elements of what's going on in the world. But also, it's really important to remember there's goodness too. This is also along the same lines, of inspired by positive psychology, which is a branch of psychology that talks about and researches and looks at what are the elements of mental wellness, what are the ways that what are the things that we can kind of work on in our own lives to cultivate a positive sense of mental health. So I think that there's a lot of room for us to explore that with nutrition and our relationships with food. So that's my intention with this podcast episode. I want to talk about what does it look like when things are going well, things are going right with your nutrition. Okay, so I want to share some feedback that I've gotten from followers when I ask them this question, because I think that ultimately it's most helpful to hear from other people who are possibly in your similar shoes, who have been where you are and who have been in the trenches of struggling with their relationship with food. And when prompted to say, hey, what's going well right now for you, you'll hear some really specific things that are going well for people. You might hear some more broad, general things. But I want to kind of share, first of all, I want to share from actual people the feedback that I got when I put this out there. And then I also want to kind of give some of my own insight. And also I'll answer a few questions from some listeners. So hopefully that sounds okay as a general outline for the podcast. And with that, let's dive in. So when I put it out there asking what are 1 to 2 things that are going well for you in your relationship with food right now, here's some of the responses I got. One person said, letting myself buy chicken thighs. This is something I've only recently done. I only ever bought chicken breasts. The idea of buying anything but the leanest cut of meat was crazy to me. It's nice to eat a different cut, especially one with way more flavor. It's more interesting and satiating to me. So I'm just going to pause and say, some of these will really resonate and you'll say, oh, what a good idea. I didn't think of that. And others might just not resonate with you. In no way do I want to make it sound like you need to add each and every one of these things into your life, or that you need to change to be like each and every one of these things. But maybe hearing what other people's wins are might inspire you to kind of recognize your own positive steps you've taken toward healing your own relationship with food. Okay, another person said, the realization that there is really no bad food or good food based on outside criteria. Food that was previously demonized can really work well for me. I have no problem with bread or gluten. I also learned that eating satisfying foods cannot be overrated. Our bodies are smart and will catch on quickly to attempts to control with bouts of out of control. Eating what my body is really asking for instead of what I think I should be eating leaves me feeling my best. All right, another person said, the comforting knowledge and trust that I'm never going to put my brain and body through food restriction ever again. Not having a diet looming in my future is such a relief and opens up space for much more fulfilling projects. Oh, I just have to pause and say that is so true. When you're always planning on the next diet, today, well, actually what I'll say, I want to explain this more in depth because I think that this will resonate for many of you listening. So a lot of you will say, well, I'm not restricting. I let myself eat foods that I really like. I want you to really, really assess when you're eating foods that you really enjoy or that you deem maybe, quote, indulgent or something that you normally wouldn't let yourself eat when you were dieting. If while you're eating those foods, if you can practice a bit of mindfulness and really look at the thoughts that come into your head, and if you notice that the thought that comes into your head is, okay, it's all right to eat this right now, but I'm not going to let you eat this tomorrow. You're going to get right back on track and you're not going to do this ever again. And you're going to eat salads all day tomorrow, or whatever your mind might say. If you're noticing that self-talk come up, I really want to encourage you to take a step back and really work on challenging those thoughts. Let them come in, let them come out, sure, but also say, no, actually, this food is on the table today, it's on the table tomorrow. I can give myself permission to enjoy this food on a very regular basis. So when we plan for future restriction, when we're eating a food that we deem, quote, bad right now, and the way that we rationalize that choice is by saying, well, tomorrow I won't let myself. What you will find is that planning for future restriction yields current chaos. So we really, really want to look at, yes, you might be physically letting yourself eat foods, but you might be mentally restricting yourself, which could be yielding current binging or chaos with food or overeating or whatever it is that we might want to call it. So I just want to share that with you. Don't really, really resist the urge to sort of calculate in your head to make it okay that you're eating this certain food by saying, I'm committing that tomorrow I won't. That usually does not yield, positive results. So look at that mental restriction. I loved this person's comment talking about how comforting it feels to really, really know in your heart and in your mind and in your soul that you are not going to put your body through this restriction ever again, and how much that just opens space up in your brain for more fulfilling things. I just want to say, yes, I completely agree. And it's such an honor to be a part of people's process to find this freedom, because ultimately that's why I do what I do. That's why I have my online course, Positive Nutrition for Life, actually goes into this really, really in depth. So if this is resonating, yeah, I want to trust that I'll never go on a diet. I want to know, what does that look like? How do I get there? What do I do instead? How do I even practice this whole not dieting thing? Or how do I work on my mental restriction? Consider joining that course. So that's Positive Nutrition for Life. That one is all about healing your relationship with food. And then there's another course that's all about the gentle nutrition part of intuitive eating. So we'll probably get into that because I did get a few questions about how to navigate gentle nutrition. But just keep in mind, there's two different courses similarly named. One is more kind of working on the process of healing your relationship with food, and the other one is all about the science of nutrition. Okay, so another person gave me the feedback, and I loved this one so much. She said, I love cooking for others, but didn't find much joy in cooking for myself. I live by myself and will occasionally invite my friends over for dinner, but it's not always possible due to our personal schedules. So most days, I would make a very basic meal. I never made elaborate dishes for myself until I decided that I am worthy of eating delicious food. So I've started to cook special dishes for myself, and that's been an act of self-love. I love that one so much. How inspiring to this comment of, I decided I am worthy of eating delicious food. Yes, you are. And even if you live alone, even if you are a parent of really busy kids and a busy life, you still are worthy of this. So I loved that wonderful piece of feedback, that reflection about what's going well right now. Another person said, having a more intimate relationship with my body and honoring what I want to eat in that moment. Even when I was out of my most restrictive phases of my eating disorder, I would still regulate my snacks based on what my meals look like. So for example, if I had too much bread today, I can't have a popcorn for snack, etc. I can happily say I do not do that anymore and feel so empowered listening to my body and what it needs and honoring that. Another person said, I'm loving the freedom to make any recipe that looks good to me. I always used to limit myself to the healthy dinner recipes on Pinterest, quote unquote, and found I way overate those meals because they weren't satisfying. Now I can make whatever recipe looks good with no weird substitutions, and I'm way more satisfied and need way less to leave the meal happy. Another person said, I can now go to social gatherings and not restrict all the foods or eat everything in sight, even when I don't really want it. I can just enjoy time with my family and friends and savor the foods I truly want. Oh, that's such a big deal. Think about how integral food is to our social lives and to the way we connect with the people that we hold most dear. And the idea that you can go with a clear mind, ready and open to connect with these people and to love these people and to listen to these people and to support these people and to really live out probably some of your most deeply held values. Now, instead of worrying about what the food will be or worrying about how much you're eating or feeling this compulsion to eat all the food because it's your last time you're going to let yourself do this and tomorrow you're going to get back on track, so to speak. Rather than that, you're able to have this open heart and mind to the people that you care about the very most. To me, that is the reason that I do what I do. That is the beauty of this work, of working on your relationship with food, is all of a sudden now you get to live out your values. You get to do what's most important to you. And yeah, you're still going to have body image stuff that comes up, or you're still going to have old food worries or fears that come up and that kind of catch you off guard. Or you're going to have memories that can be sort of disturbing about maybe old things you used to do with foods or old associations you used to have. That's not to say that when you're on a great track with healing your relationship with food, that all of a sudden things are rosy and easy and you never have any problems. Please, please, please don't fall into the trap of believing that, because the process of working on your relationship with food is ongoing. What else do you have to do, 4 to 6 times a day other than eat food? I mean, I can't think of many other things in our life that we do quite that often. So when we think about it that way, this is just the fundamental, one of the most important things of our life, that if we can kind of put our minds at ease about it and put our bodies at ease, meaning our bodies trust that we're going to get adequately nourished multiple times per day, and that we're going to feel satisfied, we're going to feel energized, and we're going to feel like we've gotten enough. Now think of what freedom your mind and your body will experience to do the things that are most important. I just love that about this work. All right, I'll just read a couple more kind of wins and ways that people have been able to really connect with what's working well for them. One person said journaling about underlying feelings when I'm craving or wanting to numb with food. Yes, journaling and writing down is one of the quickest ways to really understand your own thoughts and to be able to kind of see your thoughts on paper and create some separation, to be able to be a bit more curious and non-judgmental about them rather than getting all caught up in your thoughts. So I love that one. Another person said building a repertoire of snacks and small meals so I never get too hungry. For sure. This idea of having enough food around to be able to, make healthy, balanced, whatever you want to call it, just reasonable, satisfying meals is such an amazing place to start. If you don't have those foods around, how are you supposed to be able to nourish your body? So I love that. And side note, if you're listening to this right as it's getting released, you'll probably not be too late to sign up for my webinar that I'm doing all about meal planning. So dieting and diet culture does not need to have a monopoly on this whole idea of meal planning. You can plan meals. You can have food in your house that can be from a place of self-care and not a place of trying to be overly calculated or punitive. You can do this from a non-diet perspective, and I want to show you how. So if you are wanting to sign up for this webinar and this is after the fact, so I'm recording this webinar live on June 25th, 2019. If you're listening to this after the fact, just know that you can always head over to the Positive Nutrition Academy website, which is just positive-nutrition.com/academy. And you can purchase that webinar there for $20 through the Positive Nutrition Academy. And you'll get access to the meal planning tools and the templates and the worksheets and all of that stuff along with the actual webinar and training. So feel free to check that out because I'm really excited about being able to put out that resource all about the positive nutrition approach to meal planning. Okay, another person reported that one of their wins is having good early pregnancy blood sugar numbers and no food anxiety. Hallelujah. Woohoo. I loved this one. Again, the prompt is, what are some things that are going well in your relationship with food right now? One person said, future self-authoring, getting out more with hobbies and chatting to people outside my gym and family. I love that idea of future self-authoring. That's awesome. Another person said cooking, making bread, trying smoothie bowls, eating out, being honest with my partner. I love it. Getting out of the mindset that there are morals attached to food, being less self-critical too. Woohoo! Working on self-compassion, working on food neutrality, all of this stuff. If you can just zoom out on your relationship with food right now, yeah, things might not be perfect. And side note, they'll never be perfect, right? But if you can zoom out and you say, yeah, you know what? I am being more compassionate with myself. Oh, I am really doing better with not attaching so much morality, good food, bad food, right, wrong, should, shouldn't when it comes to food. Count that as a huge, huge win and give yourself some credit. Another person said, honoring my hunger cues. My newborn is actually teaching me how to do this so well. Another person said, I'm being honest and reaching out for help. Hopefully I'll start treatment soon. I love it. Thank you so much for acknowledging how big of a step and how much like courage and hope and all the good things that took to reach out for help. I just really admire that so much. Another person said, spending time around others who have great relationships with food. Modeling is key. So if I want to just mention this one really quick, this is something that comes up all the time. This idea of, okay, I've worked on my relationship with food. I have really felt the power in embracing intuitive eating or connecting to my body, whatever it might be. But the people in my life that I'm around are really not on the same page with me. How do I do this? That's a big question I get on a very regular basis. And I just want to say, first of all, I have so much compassion for that. Second of all, it could really go one of two ways. If people are open and interested, you could ask a lot of open-ended questions and just really try to sort of get a feel. Are they interested? Are they willing to learn? Can I share some of the things that I've learned, maybe from my own perspective, not from an advice standpoint or you should be doing this too standpoint, but more like, here's been my experience, here's what I've learned, here's how this has been positive for me in my life. That only works if the person wants to hear you. If they don't want to hear you, no matter how non-preachy you want to sound, you'll probably still sound a bit preachy, so be careful with that. Another way that this could go is just to get really honest with yourself. Why do you want to share this with other people? Is it because you want validation? Is it because you want them to be doing what you're doing? Is it because you feel a little bit nervous or insecure about this new approach to food? And if the answer is yes to some of those questions, please, please, please don't feel like you're wrong or bad for that. But what I would say is some people just aren't going to want to hear this stuff. And the more you try to explain it to them, the more of a wedge you might drive in your actual relationship, because they might start judging you about your approach to food. You might feel less comfortable around them, and it could potentially be just sort of a negative thing. So, whatever feels right to you, I want to give you all the permission to explore it. But at the same time, I also want to say one option is you don't need to share, and you can just have this be your thing. And it doesn't need to be something that you go evangelize to everybody around you. You could say, if someone says, how do you approach food? Or what are you working on? Or how's treatment going for you? Or whatever it might be, you could say, you know what? I'll explain more about it when I know more about it. Because right now I'm still figuring it out. I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't need to explain yourself. Because sometimes in an attempt to explain yourself, you actually end up doing the thing you don't want to be doing, which often takes the form of there's more distance between you and the people you love. And the truth is, the way you approach food and the way someone else approaches food shouldn't be the dividing factor in your relationship. I would hope that if someone in your life is doing some diet that you don't think is right for them, but you yourself are really trying to approach food in a more connected and positive way. I know how difficult that can be, and I have so much compassion for that. But I also know that when we try to force people to see things the way we do, it often ends up just sending up the other person's walls and they don't hear you, and then there's more distance. And to me, that's really sad. So I just want to give you some space to really explore that yourself, and to give you some permission to, things change, relationships evolve. You can set boundaries, you can ask questions, you can also just really try to steer the conversation in a way that's not food related or body related, if you feel like they're just not going to hear you. You also don't have to answer everybody's questions about intuitive eating, especially if you're new to it. It can be really a lot to try to explain this stuff. It's a lot for me to explain this stuff to my personal life, friends and family. A lot of people in my life don't understand it, and I explain this stuff for a living. So if it's hard for you to explain, if you find some difficulty with it, you're more than fine to just say, hey, I'm still learning myself. I'll explain more when I feel like I have the knowledge and the ability to do so. Okay, so I've explained and highlighted a lot of what is working well for people. I hope that some of these things have resonated. Some of these things have kind of inspired you and helped you figure out maybe how you're succeeding and how you're moving in the right direction. That is my hope and intention with sharing these things. I'll share a few more and then I'll move on to the questions. One person said, asking myself what would feel nourishing to me right now, and then finding the closest equivalent in my pantry. Another person said, staying neutral about food and noticing eating what actually makes me feel my best. Getting more contrast at meals and snacks up to the satisfaction factor, like contrasting textures, temperatures, raw versus cooked, crunchy versus chewy. I'm enjoying the freedom to cook and try new cuisines without the fear and the guilt, and just for fun. Okay, so hopefully some of those have inspired some recognition and realization for yourself in seeing how you you yourself are making improvements with food. Now let's move on to a few questions that I got. One was about lunch. One of my great listeners reported that lunch is one of the most difficult parts of her day. I just want to say solidarity, sister, because lunch is a really difficult meal for a lot of us. So I find that actually having sort of a set time or a set window of time where you typically eat lunch can be really helpful. So for example, maybe it's like 11:30 to 1:30. That's if it's 2 o'clock and you haven't had lunch yet and you're kind of like, I don't know if I'm even really hungry. It's reasonable to still eat a solid lunch because that sets you up for being hungry and ready to go at dinner time. Maybe you're meeting up with friends or you're having someone over for dinner, or maybe you're cooking for your family. So I think that what can happen with lunch is we put it off, and then we all of a sudden get so hungry that we're just nibbling on things all afternoon. We don't really register that we've eaten. We start to feel this energy crash. We yell at our kids. We're not the nicest people. We're not living in alignment with our values. And then we just feel really discouraged about food, about ourselves, all these things. I see this pattern so often when it comes to lunchtime. And sometimes with intuitive eating, we can get really wrapped up in only eating when we're hungry and always stopping when we're full. So be really careful to not turn intuitive eating into the hunger and fullness diet. It's okay to eat even if you don't really feel like you want to eat right then and there. A lot of times you actually are hungry. You just might not recognize it. Eating, every few hours as a reasonable sort of, first attempt at figuring out your own structure with food. I think adding in a normal, regular lunchtime where maybe you have some typical lunch meals that you can just kind of choose from each lunch. So, for example, for me, it's usually either a sandwich with a couple sides or quesadilla with a couple sides or cheese and crackers with a couple sides. When I don't feel super inspired about lunch, which honestly is pretty regular, lunch is hard for me too, I just go to those three and I say, okay, which one seems like something I could make right now or that would taste okay to me? We also want to be really careful with intuitive eating that we don't turn this into like the satisfaction, fascist regime. I just made that up. But the idea being we don't want to be satisfaction fascists. We don't want to say, well, I can't eat a quesadilla today because that just doesn't sound super, super delicious. So maybe I just won't eat anything at all. Remember, what we're doing is we're trying to approach food and our bodies in a way that's ultimately going to work for us. And by work, I just mean help us live the lives we want to live. Help us have the energy we need to have. Help us have the nutrition we need to have. Help us have the satisfaction and the enjoyment that makes life fun. So if we can kind of zoom out and say, okay, I need to eat breakfast around a typical time in the morning and lunch in the midday and dinner in the evening. Those are my just non-negotiable meal times. And then in between those meal times, I check in with myself. I ask myself, do I feel like I need something to get to that next meal? Now, side note, many of you listening I know are maybe in eating disorder recovery or currently thinking about getting into recovery. And I just want to say, whatever I'm saying on a podcast should be taken with a huge grain of salt. You should always listen and obey and comply with your meal plan that your registered dietitian has come up with you for your own individualized needs. So I'm kind of speaking in general terms here, but my main point I want to make is I see this so often where people don't prioritize meal times, especially lunch. We just put it off, and it really comes back to bite us later on in the day. So having a bit of structure around meal times, having just some kind of ready to go fallback meals if you're not feeling super inspired, or if you don't happen to have leftovers that you're excited about eating that day or whatever. If you have a few options in mind, this can be a really, really helpful thing to implement. So what I'll say too is I'm going to talk about this in way more depth in that webinar called The Positive Nutrition Approach to Meal Planning. So check that out in the Academy because that also might be helpful for you to sort of have more discussion around this lunch question in context of sort of meal planning in general. Okay, someone else asked the question, kind of highlighted the fact that, well, that their wellness program at work is triggering new issues for them or old issues for them, and just sort of was wondering, like, how do I navigate this? What does this mean? How do I move forward given the fact that I feel really triggered? What I would say is this is not an uncommon topic for me to process with my clients. Maybe the weighing or the body fat percentage or whatever else that comes up in a wellness checkup, or I don't think they're called that, wellness screening. And sometimes they even have like challenges or programs that have to do with weight loss or have to do with counting calories or something maybe in the past that has been a big part of a person's dysfunction or struggle with food. So to you, I just want to say, wow, 100% understandable why this would be triggering. It is for lots of people. I see so much room for improvement in how wellness programs treat their employees, treat their members, and I really would love to be a part of a solution from that level to help programs be a bit more sensitive to eating disorders, to body image issues, and those types of things. But in the meantime, while we're still sort of navigating that and trying to work on that from, the top down level, from the individual's level who might be feeling triggered or struggling, first of all, I want to say there's no shame in reaching out for help. So if you want to find a therapist and or a registered dietitian to discuss your concerns with, that is completely 100% reasonable. And not crazy. If you feel like, oh, why should I need to talk to someone about this? I would just say, like, it could also be preventative in things kind of spiraling. So I would also say, journaling, doing your own self-care around this, really having someone, if it's not a therapist or a dietitian, maybe having someone in your life that you can discuss this with and really process your concerns and questions with. Hopefully you have someone like that. I highly recommend that if that's accessible to you. What I would also say is if there's any way to opt out or if there's any way to have a conversation or even advocate for yourself, that's also really ideal and really could be beneficial for the program ultimately to be able to have that feedback. So those are all things that come to mind. And also just I want to offer you a lot of compassion because I know that is not an easy thing to navigate. Okay, one other person asked, kind of mentioned that learning about intuitive eating has led to more connection to this person's values and to their inner needs and their inner wisdom and more intuition around lots of elements in life beyond food. And first of all, yay, I love that. That's so cool. And that's part of what I love about the work that I get to do. But she also mentioned, I'm going to paraphrase her here, but something along the lines of like, wow, okay, now that I have this sense of trust with myself, now I'm starting to question really big things in my life, like a career that I've had for 25 years. And I'm just not sure if this is what I want to be doing. I'm not sure. I'm having sort of an inkling that this isn't really working for me. And she reached out saying, help, how do I navigate that? First of all, I'm honored that you would think that I have answers about that. That one sounds really complex and really worthy of lots of introspection. I'm sure you're already doing that. Lots of time, maybe some therapy, maybe talking with a trusted family member or friend. I'm a big fan of workability. I'm a big fan of doing what works ultimately in your life to help you align with your values and with the things that are most important to you. So there's often no clear-cut answer like, oh, well, just quit your job and just do what you love, because maybe after 25 years, you need to just keep doing what you're doing. And maybe that makes the most sense for you. And maybe you can make a few changes to make it more fulfilling or better aligned with you and your values, but maybe it's not reasonable to completely make a change. Or after all that introspection and work, maybe you determine, you know what? I've always felt called to do this other thing and I want to explore it. And I'm in a time in my life where I feel like I can, and it feels scary, but I'm going to ask for support from friends and family and therapy and all that stuff. So what I would say is I don't have any great thoughts about this other than how amazing that working on your relationship with food, learning to trust yourself, learning to connect with your needs, learning to honor your own internal wisdom. How cool and profound is that can extend to other areas of your life that are meaningful to you. I just think that is so beautiful. And while I don't have any specific answers for you, I just want to say that is why this work is so meaningful and why I'm so happy to be able to help my individual clients and to be able to offer courses like the Positive Nutrition for Life course, which really walks you through a lot of this values work that I'm talking about, a lot of the self-compassion work that I'm talking about, a lot of the mindfulness and awareness of your thoughts and your self-talk and all of that stuff, because I think that I just wish every person knew that they could trust themselves, because I think we'd all be happier, we'd have more energy to do the things that are more important to us, and we'd go out into the world and do the things that we're really good at, solving the problems that need to be solved, rather than spending so much of our time and energy worried about our bodies and about food. So good luck to you with that. Okay, someone else asked, how do I know if I'm ready for the gentle nutrition part of intuitive eating? That is a great question. And what I would say is a lot of people like to give really sort of concrete answers to this. They say, well, you have to have done all 9 principles of intuitive eating first, and you have to master those before you even move on to gentle nutrition. And I get where people are coming from with that. I understand that tendency to kind of want to give you a blanket statement. Here's how you know, and here's what you need to do, and here's this formulaic path. With the way that my brain works and the way that I approach this stuff, I kind of just want to say, if you put the pressure on yourself to be perfect at making peace with food and perfect at rejecting diet mentality and perfect at saying no to the food police and coping with your emotions without using food, that's one of the principles, even though it's not really that cut and dry. Anyway, or if you're expecting yourself to be perfect with hunger and honoring fullness and all of these things, I just think that we are setting ourselves up for kind of staying in this circular place. So yeah, you want to do the work of really challenging dieting and the dieting mentality and really recognizing it in yourself and having some confidence in your ability to practice mindfulness so that you can recognize what thoughts are coming in. You have some tools and some skills to work with those thoughts. You want to have some skills in place for practicing self-compassion. Sure, like I'm totally with you on that. But if you wait until you just feel like you have got all this stuff down, I think that you are going to feel really disappointed. I think that you're going to feel really stuck, because at some point you just have to say, okay, I'm going to dive into this gentle nutrition part of intuitive eating. I need to kind of weave in the knowledge of my brain with the wisdom of my body. Ultimately, that's what I think gentle nutrition is. So I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but for me, in my own personal experience with intuitive eating, I actually found that learning about nutrition in my schooling was incredibly helpful for me to reject the dieting mentality. So I think that these are all very interdependent processes. And when we get really strict and rigid, saying, don't you dare look at that chapter until X, Y, and Z, I think we run the risk of feeling like we need to be perfect before we start to look at some gentle nutrition principles. So what I want to say is, don't listen to me Don't listen to anyone else unless you happen to be in treatment for an eating disorder and you have a team. But with those caveats, I want to say, go inside, look at yourself, look at your intentions, look at your process so far, look at the wins that we've talked about today in the podcast episode and say, do I feel like I'm ready to kind of learn some gentle nutrition principles or some nutrition science principles? Do I feel like I could learn those things from a place of curiosity and non-judgment? And is there room for me maybe adding in a bit of wisdom from the science about nutrition into what I'm already working on from that really kind of practical, personal place of rejecting diets and making peace with food and working on satisfaction. So if you go inside and you get really honest, and that yields a lot of fear, a lot of judgment, a lot of like, ooh, I just don't feel like I'm ready, like, please honor that. But if you're like, you know what, I would love to learn more about why carbohydrates aren't so bad, or why my body needs fat, or how to put a meal together that's most likely going to help me feel full and satisfied and energized, and answer some of my questions about how often should I be eating, and how do I reject these fad diets when people sound really sciencey and I get really kind of sucked in, but on an intuitive level, I know it's probably not going to be good for me. How do I navigate that? If you feel ready to start exploring those questions, you might be ready for the gentle nutrition part of intuitive eating. So what I would also say is my course about this, Positive Nutrition 101, which I co-teach with Jesse Hoffman, who has a PhD in nutrition science and who also has been on the podcast multiple times. If you're feeling like, yeah, I'm ready for that, or ooh, I feel like this might be the missing piece in my healing my relationship with food, check that out at the Positive Nutrition Academy as well. So you can access that at positive-nutrition.com/academy. Okay. I feel like this has been a long enough podcast of me rambling on and on and on. And I just want to just express my appreciation for all of you being so open and willing to share your wins and willing to explore these concepts with me throughout the years. Again, it's just such an honor. It's so much fun. I love being able to put out this content for all of you, and I will continue doing so as long as it is helpful to you and also energizing and positive for me as well. So thanks for being here, and I will see you very soon for another episode. Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.